So to give you an idea of where we are headed with our workshop today, I've got a few examples, and I don't know that we will get to all three of these, but hopefully we can touch on just the ideations that get us to this point. So a couple of just different examples and styles that you can do inside of Photoshop. So let's just start with like a basic on, well, what is Photoshop? So Photoshop allows us to manipulate pixels. So manipulate the dots of photographic information. We can also paint in Photoshop. We can also create shapes, layer objects, and those are really the things that we're going to be playing with today. How to optimize our use of layers and layer modes. So our goal today is to create a YouTube banner. So the first thing I want to do is show you where we can get that sizing. So this is one of my favorite websites for getting social media size. So I've just went down to the YouTube section, and you can see all of them linked down below. And so we are looking at a cover photo size. So that's the size we're targeting, this 2048 by 1152. And so let's go ahead and set up a new document inside of Photoshop where all of our source images will live. So I'm going to go File, New. And just like anything inside of the Adobe suite, when we start a new document, we want to think about where are we going with this. So we have our print, art and illustration, web, mobile, film, and video. Now, web and mobile are very similar because what they're going to do is give us sizes in pixels as opposed to print that'll give us in inches, or we could change it to picas. Notice our resolution also shifts. So Photoshop is what's called resolution dependent, meaning we are going to establish a specific size. And if someone decided to run that larger, there might be a quality issue. So that's why if you've seen things in print, or maybe you've been working on a project and your images that you place, say in InDesign, don't look as well, that's the reason why. It's different being pixel-based as opposed to vector-based. Vector-based programs like InDesign and Illustrator allow you to infinitely scale content. So let's go ahead and create our 2048 by 1152. A little word about resolution here. So generally for screen, 72 to 150 is a great range to be in. If we were going to print, I would want a resolution of probably around 300. We also have our color mode, RGB, as opposed to print, which is CMYK. A screen color mode adds white, as opposed to print, which adds that K or the black. We've got a white background that we're setting up. And just a note, if I was going to create a lot of YouTube banners, I might want to go ahead and save this as a preset. I'll go ahead and create that new document. And so I purposefully brought in my artboard because I wanted to show you this was a new feature added, let's say 2019. If the artboards confuse you, you can just come down to your layers panel, right click, and ungroup those artboards. So then you just have your typical layer. Now you can see in our layer, we can see these little squares of information. So we know that this is currently transparent. And we're going to bring in our photo and start working with it. So if I look under my File menu, I have a few options here to place content in here. I can place embedded, which means it'll take that content and embed it in this file. Or I can place a linked file. Sometimes you might want to do that if someone else is, say, working on a logo project and you want to kind of get started on your part of it, so you can place the linked. And as the other logo content is updated, your file will update as well. I could also just copy and paste from an open file. So let's go ahead and with this, let's just file, and we're going to place an embedded. And I am just going to find the file that we want for this one. And it's this one right here. And so I just want to point out you have this option menu here. And this option is just going to enable some different options here. So for example, if I pick a TIFF and have those options, I could kind of pick which layers will come in. So I'm going to go ahead and place that. And then we're just going to scale this up. So I already have my transform tools in here. And you can see that right up here. And we're just going to get this scaled into place. So I can zoom out so I can see a little more because I want this to be a lot bigger than it is now. I don't need to hold the shift key down or anything like that as I'm scaling. I can just move this into place. And so as soon as I like that, I can click the check mark or hit return on my keyboard, and then I can have that document in there. So now I'm ready to start working with layers and working with some things here. But there's a few things in this photo that I kind of want to fix before we go any further. One of which is this bench. This bench is kind of in the way for what I want to do here. We can totally fix that. So let me show you how we can fill using our content aware tool. First thing we want to do is any selection tool, including our quick selections, our lasso, any of these tools would work for selection. I'm going to do a pretty loose selection with my lasso tool, and I do want to complete that. So I come back to the beginning. I want to get those marching ants in there. And so what I want to do is fill this with other content. Oops, and I forgot to make this editable. So let me come back over here. And I'm just going to rasterize this layer. So now it is, I no longer have that linking down there. So I can delete that object and fill that in if I want to. But a really cool thing I can do is go to my edit menu and content aware fill. And it's going to pick what areas that it's pulling from. And you can see this is the final. So I can come in here and I can repaint and look at that. It's finding all the information right there. So I'm going to say that is exactly what I want. And I'm going to hit OK. And boom, we've removed that document. Now, I'm pointing this out because sometimes in these type of projects where I'm doing some work for YouTube, I might want to clean up my photos and my images a little bit. But if I'm working in a journalistic sense, so I'm working for a publication, I probably don't want to do that. So just keep in mind there's a difference between editorial work and journalistic work. So I've moved on to my spot healing brush. And this is under the healing tools, and we won't get to all of these, but I do encourage you to experiment with them. Spot healing is great because it just works by clicking. And notice I switched back to my bottom layer to do that. Our correction is on this top layer here. So if I hide, that's the stuff it invented. And if I want to, I can take both of these layers, I just shift click them, and I can merge them together. So now it's one document. So I cleaned up the little parts in that image that I would want to. When we scaled, we left some parts up here that are empty. So I could use the same thing up here that we did with that chair. So I'll just select that and edit, content aware fill, and it's going to fill that area as well. Let's get our preview in here. So not too bad. Got a little crazy over here with that roof. but we can go ahead and apply that if we want to. In our case, I think we're going to end up doing something different, so I'm not going to worry about that right now. But just to show you that sometimes it doesn't do a great job of making all of the choices. So our experiment with this is to use some pen and shape tools. So I'm going to grab my pen tool. And what I'm doing is I want to kind of turn this into more of a hand-drawn look. I'm going to hit a new layer so that my tracing is on my new layer. You might be asking yourself, well, Heather, why wouldn't you do this in Illustrator? Well, sometimes it's interesting to combine the idea of both shape tools and photos. And that's kind of the look we're going to go for in this first example. So I'm just going to grab my pen tool. And you can see it's already starting to create a shape. And I want to have no stroke on this. And I want to have a fill. Let's see. Let's do the fill to match right there. Let's make sure we're selecting from the right layer. Okay. So I'm just looking at each side of this building. I'm going to close that shape. So now I've got that full shape. Now, I could make each of these shapes separate layers if I wanted to, but that could get a little tiring if I did that. So instead, I'm going to just continue to select different shapes. Actually, I am going to do different layers so we can blend them a little bit differently. And I'm not worried about precision here really, because, you know, this is kind of an artistic interpretation. And so in some places, I'm just kind of guessing where that line might come down. And the cool thing about this is I can bring my direct selection tool, and I didn't get that one quite right. So I'll just adjust that a little bit. So that looks pretty good. So now if we wanted to bring in those windows, here's how I would do that. In my layers panel, I would temporarily hide that main layer, and I can create one window. And remember, we're not, you know, this is our artistic interpretation, so we don't need to be exact. And then I can copy this shape. So I'm just going to Alt drag it. And I can just continue to Alt drag it. And if I want to rescale things, I could rescale them. Just any combination of that. Now for our purposes, I actually think I'm going to leave the windows off because I'm going to bring in some of this background here. So I'm kind of liking what I have here, but you know, I want to kind of create a green space here and a blue space up here. So let's do that. Let's make a horizon line and make that happen. So I'm going to start a new layer, and this layer I actually want to bring all the way to the back. I'm going to grab my marquee tool, and we're just going to say right here, we're going to fill. So I'm going to go edit fill. And this time we're going to use a color. Now let's just pick a real nice green color for grass and hit OK, and hit OK again. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the sky shape. So I'm just going to select. Let me Command D to deselect that other shape. So I've got my next shape. And we're going to go edit, fill with color. And we're going to grab a nice blue sky and hit OK. And doesn't matter that there's parts here that might be a little off. No, that's fine. We can still tweak these. So I can come down to my grass layer. And let's say I just want to transform that. That's Command T. And I can transform that, or I can go up to my sky and transform it. So I'm just going to bring that sky up a little bit, get that into position. And all it is a filled layer, and return. So I'm happy with that. And now I want to kind of play with how this larger shape is interacting with what's behind it. So I'm going to use my layer mode. And as I adjust my layer mode, you can see it's going to pull in that background a little bit. Now, right now, this blue is kind of getting in my way. So I'm going to have to tweak some things around with this, but that's not a big deal. So let's just move this up here. Actually, let me do a little trick here. I'm going to make a copy of this layer by selecting and dragging it to the plus. And now I've got that in there. So you can see how it's burning in that color layer that I selected. So that's kind of an interesting look. Let's leave that. And I could do this for all of my shapes. So there's my roof shape. And so if I want to kind of burn that. And so it creates kind of a hand-drawn combination. And I'm keeping an eye on our time. So I just want to take you back to our examples and kind of break down these layers so you can see what we did with all of these. And then I'll show you how to get the logo and things on here. So in this case, what we have is, and we'll hide this top layer. So there's my tracing layer. And then here is my building layer. And what I've done is I've deleted all the other content, so I don't have to worry about any of that other content. And I've just overlaid that on top of my tracing layer here. And the background is just that solid color. And that's just a matter of what you choose to select and overlay. In this example, I've used a gradient in the background and have similar layering, except I've hid the building. If we have time, we'll come back and do some finishing up with this. But basic skills are still the same with drawing your shape and then, deciding how you want to layer in this content. You can see how it looks when we do that overlay. So that's kind of an interesting play on what we've created. And just to show you what we can do with that gradient, I'll hide that right there. And so our gradient is right here, and we're actually going to do that in the next project. So I'll go ahead and hold off on showing you gradients for now, but I did want to show you how you can place objects and do some type on here. So let's dive into that. So inside all Adobe programs, you have these wonderful Creative Cloud libraries, and your Creative Cloud libraries are kind of like your source for all the content that you're going to use. So I've got this JSchool Tech icon here. And when I just drag and drop it, it drags and drops onto my layers, and I can move it around. Now it's just a layer like everything else. And I'm going to move it to the very top of my stacking order. And so obviously I transformed it down just like we did before, but I also put a little skew on it. So when you want to do some other transforms beyond just a free transform, you can go to Edit, Transform, and Skew. And I just brought this up a little bit so it looked like it was more mapped to the side of the building. And then we can hit return. Same thing with text. You might have noticed we had some text on there. So grab my type tool. And as soon as I draw my text box, you can see we've got a type layer that comes in. Up here, I can change the color of that text. And I can go in my properties panel and change the size of that text, as well as the font and any other features. So that gives you some ideas of how you can use the pen tool to create some shapes. Other shapes that you can create are buried beneath this rectangle tool, including a custom shape tool. So you can use all kinds of different custom shapes in your design as well, using all of our layers, blending those in whatever way we want. So let's go ahead and create another document, and we're going to play with heading in this direction. So kind of a different look here. So I'm going to go File, New. Notice that here is our most recent design size that we set up before. So we'll just create from it. And again, I have my artboard. So if I don't want that, I can ungroup the artboards. And in this case, we're actually going to start out with that gradient. So I've selected my gradient tool, and then up here along my control bar, I have a linear, a radial, a diamond gradient, and a few other styles that I could use. For our purposes, we're just going to use a regular linear gradient. And you can see there's all kinds of different gradients that you can use. And so I went into the blues and found a blue that I like. I can also create my own. So I just clicked on that swatch, and that allows me to change my color chips. So I can pick from my foreground or background. I could color pick over here and give a very precise gradient. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And now to draw our gradient, I just drag that tool, and you can see I'm going from dark to light. If I want it to go the other way, I can draw in the other direction. So we've got our background set up, and I want to bring in a different photo. So this time I'm going to show you how to open a photo. So we're going to open this photo right here. And I'm going to copy and paste it over instead of placing the embedded. So select all, edit copy, edit paste. Same as before, if I want to transform, Command T, and just get this size correctly, hit return. So I've got my photo in here, and you might be thinking, well, what's the point of having the background? I could use exactly what we used before, popping in here, experimenting with my overlays. You know, that's kind of an interesting look. I could also start experimenting with, well, how's this going to look if I actually change the color of this photo? So let me introduce you to the adjustments panel. And then the adjustments panel, this is where I can make all kinds of different color contrast and photo improvements. If you want to learn how to do that, we've got some really good videos on J School Tech on how to do that. For our purposes here today, we're just doing some black and white adjustment to that. So now I've got a black and white adjustment, and I'm going to do what's called clipping it to this layer. So now it's locked to this layer, meaning that below this layer, this is still a blue color. So now when we play with our overlays, you can see we're getting kind of different looks than we did before. And this is the impact of that black and white adjustment layer. We can also start experimenting with duplicating this or adding something called a gradient map. So let's experiment with that gradient map first. So I'm going to go into my adjustments. I'm going to pick gradient map. And notice what we have here, the exact same gradients that I had before, and I can add them on top of this photo. And the stacking order does matter. So see, if I move this below here, you can't tell. I've got that gradient map, but now you can. And as I change the different gradient maps, I get kind of different looks. So I'm kind of liking how that is starting to look. You know, we can still see the building, but I've got this kind of cool blending and mapping thing happen. Let's play with this again. Ooh, that's interesting. Okay, I'm liking where we're headed here. You can also play with bringing down the opacity. So if I want to bring down the opacity of that gradient map, I can do that. Thinking I kind of want to bring some of that back. So those are just some things you can play around with. Now let's go back to our logo. We're going to bring it in. We're going to hit return. And so I want to frame this into kind of the center of this. So I don't want to cover up this sign, but I'm kind of liking that. And I want to draw some attention to it. So I can use my shape tools for that. So I can grab my rectangle tool, and I'm just going to draw my rectangle. Get that centered how I like that. And in this case, I have a stroke that has a size, and I kind of want something small. And I want to be using a pure white. So I can color pick and make sure that I have a pure white, or I can go through and select one of my other colors if that sounds good too. So I'm liking that. We've got that shape created, and you see that came up as a rectangle. I can copy that by just selecting it, hit Command J, and then I can move that out. So I'm creating some interesting layers here. Now, if I'm worried about, oh gosh, are all these aligning? I can totally align these items. So I'm going to select all three, the rectangle and the, and you can see along the top, now we have this alignment. Since I selected more than one object, I can go ahead and align these and make sure that they're centered, or make sure that they're aligned to the top, whatever I want to do to align those objects. Now let's play with adding some texture. And this is where I think Photoshop gets really fun and experimental for me, is adding things like paint layers. So I've got a photo layer, I've got color layer, I've got shape and logo. Now I'm going to add some brush layers. So I'm going to grab my brush, and I'm just going to point out, there's all kinds of different brushes you can add and download. The brushes I'm using are part of Kyle Webster's brush, and these are his oil brushes. And you can find all of his brushes. If you just search for Kyle Webster brushes, you'll be able to see them, download them. The cool thing is once you have them, you can use these brushes across your Adobe suite. So always a good idea to kind of practice the brush and the size. So I can just practice painting, test different brushes, and I like to layer things in. So I'm just going to layer in some brushes. And I'm going to make sure that my logo isn't bothered by that. And I'm actually thinking I might like to play with how those work together. So I'm liking how we've got things layered in now. Now I'm going to add a darker layer. So I'm just opening my color back up, and I'm going to make a new layer. We're going to have that go behind. And these layers also have layer modes. So you can see I can play with, multiplying them and making them even more dark. So to me, that creates interesting texture. It also breaks up the harshness of these rectangles. So I might even layer those in so that I have some covering parts of it and some not covering part of it. And if you ever end up with like brush strokes that you don't like, that's what they made an eraser tool for. So you can erase it or just delete the layer and start over with that. And again, finalize it by coming in, adding some text, and bringing that together. So hopefully that gives you an idea of maybe some tools you haven't played with inside of Photoshop, gives you some fun experiments that you can do to create some interesting things. These techniques would be fun, not only for YouTube banners, but maybe your Twitter banner, your LinkedIn banner, just to play with the idea of shape and texture and color. So thank you for coming to our workshop, and have fun creating.